Right, hey guys, how are we doing? Back on another video from Annie News, continuing the cut content series for season 2 of MUSHOKU Tensei. And this is last week's episode, not the one that's just happened. I think because we did it that time, I was reincarnated as a slime video. That took us some time, and boom, we got 2 videos in a week, which was absolutely class. This episode was great. Interesting moments happened in it. This is like, this is Rudy's beginning of his journey to go save his mum, and a couple of interesting things happened. I wonder if it's going to touch upon this. The moment where Alina Lays, or whatever her name is, went back through the portal, and then it took forever, and then came back. Rudy said he'd waited, and she said it just felt like moments. I feel like that's going to be a thing that's going to come up later. I'm going to try and zone out of things that happened in this week's episode. Maybe I shouldn't have watched that before checking this out. But yeah, apparently this journey wasn't as straightforward as the anime portrayed it to be. Let's see what was left out.
If Rudy's journey to Begarit felt fast in comparison to his other travels, then you'd be right to think that since what would normally be 2 episodes was condensed into half of one.
Oh, well, okay, so a lot got cut out, okay.
This included 7 full days of non-stop monster encounters,
Whoa.
then an additional 2 weeks with a whole new set of characters, and even an action-filled ambush with bandits.
Bandit Keith!
Unfortunately, finishing the labyrinth arc meant setting those parts aside though, so I hope you're alright with settling with my video instead.
Heck yeah, let's go!
I'll go through the true adventure Rudy and Alina Lise faced while crossing the desert.
Alina Lise. Yeah.
Along with the left-out details from the events leading up to it. So, as we go through what we missed from this transitionary episode, hopefully you'll enjoy more what this amazing story has to offer.
I'm looking forward to this.
Episode 43, Desert Journey, covering chapters 8 to 12 from volume 11 of the light novel.
Whoa. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 5 chapters!
To start things off with Rudy coming to terms with his decision, this would be the first time that he'd ever not listened to the man god.
I felt like this was a big no-no as well. Like, he knows stuff, and for him to say, don't go. And now I'm seeing... I said I would zone out from this episode that just happened.
He wasn't just ignoring the advice he was given though, but instead taking it a step further and doing the exact opposite of what he recommended.
Yeah.
It was a pretty big deal when he really thought about it, since if he'd done the same and didn't go to Sharonay when the man god told him to, then Lilia and Aisha would still be captives there. He would have never met Aisha and wouldn't have run into Orsted, and while sure the journey to Fatoa would have been easier, he probably wouldn't have heard the truth about Lilia and Aisha for years. That was one of the regrets he would have had to deal with, so it was likely the regrets he'd experience in Begarit were going to be similar. There was no telling what they'd actually be, but Rudy could imagine something as bad as losing a limb or even a parent. This was all part of the risk he was taking by going on this journey, but even that was better than waiting for years wondering what actually happened in Begarit. So Rudy would meet up with Alina Lise to tell her his decision, and it's here we find out how it is he was convinced Geese's letter wasn't just an overreaction. I mean, both him and Alina Lise knew he was the type of person to overreact, but if you looked closer at the circumstances behind how the letter got there, the only way that was possible was if Paul gave Geese his address.
Right.
This made it clear that the two had met up already, so that ruled out the possibility of Geese trying to rescue Zenith solo. Why was it that Paul didn't send the letter himself then? Well, whether it be stubborn pride or something deeper, he clearly didn't want to involve Rudy in something he was responsible for. Then there was always the fact express mail wasn't cheap either, so that alone was a big indicator things were serious too.
Right, they churned out the money for it. Whoa.
Now, there was a cutscene after this where Alina Lise and Rudy would be planning their route together, but considering the teleportation made all that irrelevant, the biggest issue aside from that was choosing what to bring and how to keep up with Alina Lise. I mean, Rudy was definitely fit and capable of making the journey, but when compared to the veteran experience of Alina Lise, he really was nothing more than an amateur. It was a gap in skill that made him worried he'd actually slow her down a bit. The other problem was Alina Lise's curse, since as I'm sure you know, her not sleeping with someone means she'll die. On casual journeys,
I mean, he nearly went for it.
this wasn't
Good girl.
much of an issue, but on a rapid expedition where breaks were minimal, finding a willing partner was definitely going to be difficult. Enough that Rudy figured they'd have to make time to find brothels on the way. This was a core part of their journey that the anime only briefly touched on, and as you'll soon see once we talk about it later, Alina Lise's curse became more of a pressing issue the longer they traveled for.
Right.
Now, it was right after this conversation that Rudy would escort Alina Lise to Cliff, since if she was going to preserve her relationship with him, then it was best she talked to him sooner than later. So, Rudy would ask Cliff if he'd love her no matter what, and it was after that that he'd explain why she'd have to leave him for a bit. Of course, mentioning how sleeping with other men was an unfortunate necessity to it, which was something Cliff surprisingly didn't say a word to. He simply sat there listening to what Rudy had to say, not once interrupting him until he was finished.
Wow, okay.
It was once everything was fully explained after that Cliff didn't even ask if he could go along with them. Since he already knew how much of a burden he'd turn out to be, both him and Alina Lise knew that he'd never make it. So instead, the only thing he could do was sit there and grit his teeth. A display of emotional maturity that had Rudy actually feeling bad for Cliff. He could tell that Cliff was definitely hurting, but the fact he held his tongue showed Cliff had a clear understanding of what he could and couldn't do.
Yeah.
Something not very many people were capable of. Cliff would then say all that stuff about wanting to get married, and Alina Lise's reaction to that was to push him over and start doing it right there.
Yeah.
Naturally, Rudy would leave as fast as possible, and that brings us now to his goodbyes with these two. Before getting into how this could very well be the last time we see these two in a while though, Rudy first mentioned how someone told him he should make a move on them.
Oh, so he mentions it. No!
A notion you may be surprised to know that both had actually shown a bit of excitement towards. This made Rudy consider how acting on it would turn out, since if the man god's words really were to be trusted, then he could expect Sylphie not to be mad at all. She definitely wouldn't kick him out of the house, and
oh god, he could have got it on with the doggo girls, alright.
Just like with all things the man god advised him on, it should, in the end, lead him to greater happiness overall. It was an alluring idea since Rudy couldn't help but think what a potential foursome would be like, but that was something he knew was best left to the imagination. Now, the goodbye was far more permanent than what we got in the anime, since with Rudy still operating under the assumption the journey would take 2 years, that meant by the time he came back, Linnea and Persena would be graduated. They would more than likely be back in the Great Forest, so unless Rudy went out of his way to see them there, this would be the last time him or us would see these two in quite a while probably. If anything, Rudy imagined it could be something like 10 or 20 years before he saw them again.
Damn.
Moving on to the scene with Nanahoshi. If you're wondering whether or not she's supposed to have this type of information, the likely and most probable answer is no. The very knowledge of teleporters was supposed to remain secret, so I doubt Orsted would want maps of them floating around anywhere. How was it that Nanahoshi was able to procure these maps then? Well, she had secretly bought maps whenever they were in a city, then marked the general locations of where she was going and what teleporters they had used in the area.
Interesting.
If there wasn't a map to buy, then Nanahoshi would create her own using rough drawings and markings. Basic notation identified the cities and continents that she was traveling through, then variables were used for the ones that she didn't know. All in all, it was a rough record of every teleporter she passed through, but given she had to create it without Orsted even knowing, I'd say the results were rather impressive. It allowed Rudy to estimate that getting to Begarit would take 47 days only. Add in 1 extra month to save Zenith, then the whole round trip would be something more like 4 months. This made Rudy excited to go tell Alina Lise, so he would rush back to where he just left her and Cliff, then barge in to see the two pretty much naked.
Nice.
Cliff was passed out in the corner looking like he'd just had the life sucked out of him, and Alina Lise was circling the room trying to come up with excuses why she couldn't go anymore. For some reason, whatever she just did with Cliff was enough to change her mind and make her not want to go anymore.
Go ahead, lad.
She couldn't bear the thought of having to leave him for 2 whole years like that. It was only after Rudy revealed it would actually be something more like 4 months that Alina Lise would change her mind again. Now, a 4-month journey was definitely way more manageable for Cliff, but because it was unlikely that he could keep the teleporters a secret, Rudy figured it was best to keep him behind this time. If things did somehow turn out so bad that they needed even more reinforcements though, then Rudy thought they could just teleport back and bring even more people. It was back home with Sylphie that things were pretty much the same, but we did get to see the types of names that Rudy had in mind for his kids. It was Ciel and Sion for if it was a girl, then Nero and Wallachia for a boy. All references to Melty Blood, which to Rudy on second thought probably wasn't the best idea. What he came up with after was something a bit more normal like Sirius or Lucy. As for why naming them before leaving was such a death flag, it all stemmed from that childhood story with Perugius. You see, one of Perugius's companions decided to name his unborn son before leaving for war, and despite the man's nickname being Fortunate Man, his skills as an Emperor-tier fire mage wasn't enough to beat the Demon King Reiner Kaisel. So, unfortunately, this fortunate man died before meeting his son, and it became a well-known story which brought a lot of superstition with it.
Right,
One
so
that
that's why people are like, let's not name the child till it's
most
born
people
thing,
believed to be a curse.
Right.
Fast forward now to the day of travel, and the route Rudy planned was pretty much this. After finding the ruins and using the teleporter, they'd spend a week heading north getting to Bazaar, then once there find a guide and hire them as an escort to Rapon. The toughest part was actually that initial 1-week journey, since not only did Rudy not have a map guiding them to Bazaar, but Nanahoshi mentioned how the route was incredibly exhausting. So much so that she actually had to be carried by Orsted when she was traveling it herself. Luckily, Alina Lise was confident in her innate elven sense of direction, so getting lost wasn't something either would have to worry about. It was kind of like a special ability which let her traverse unfamiliar terrain with ease. This was exemplified clearly in the forest, since what Rudy estimated would take 2 days at least, Alina Lise was able to do in only half. Despite this being a dense woodland where even the best rangers were known to get lost, somehow Alina Lise knew exactly where to find these ruins.
Nice.
It was while doing so that the two would proceed in their standard adventurer formation, and that was basically Alina Lise scouting in front and Rudy supporting from the back. Whatever monsters were spotted in the distance were immediately dispatched by Rudy before they could even realize that the two of them were there. It was an extremely efficient method of traversal that minimized any and all danger around them. It was once they had finally found the ruins after that the symbol marking its location could be identified as the Dragon Gods. It was rather similar to the one he found in the basement, but upon closer inspection you can tell that it's actually different. Perhaps a representation of a different dragon or a connection of the dragon god to whoever made the robot, but to me this other symbol seemed more representative of a phoenix. Either way, since the way the stone worked seemed very similar to that of a magic implement, Rudy figured breaking it open would reveal the same complex magic circles as the ones from any other magic tool. The incantation seemed part of a bigger spell as well, so Rudy wondered if learning the full one would grant him the ability to dispel barriers of any kind. I mean, as a spell most likely created by the dragon god himself, Rudy was eager to try and learn more about it. Unfortunately, any additional research would probably anger Orsted, so avoiding that was priority over everything. Rudy and Alina Lise would then approach the ruins like they would a labyrinth, mainly because the entrance to it seemed very familiar to one. This included clearing each room like it was a tactical FPS game, then carefully taking each step so as to not trigger any floor traps. It was basically Alina Lise in front leading the way and Rudy at the back supporting with his eye of foresight. Of course, there wasn't anything to worry about other than Orsted, since around the ruins were footsteps clearly
That did
belonging
make me
to
worry when I saw that. I was like, oh god, does he live here? What?
him. It made Rudy worried he could show up at any second, but given the unlikelihood of such an occurrence, he knew such worries were mostly unwarranted. It did, however, bring up the question of what they should do about their own footsteps, since if Orsted's could be seen, then theirs probably would too. Rudy thought maybe he should just leave a note or something, but that would only guarantee that Orsted knew he was there.
Yeah.
The alternative was to just do nothing, and that was what felt best since there was a chance Orsted would never find out he was here. There was no telling when Orsted would ever come back to these ruins, so surely the passage of time would cover up their presence for them. Now, teleportation felt something like waking up from a nap, and though the entire process seemed as if it was instant, the delay between jumps was more like 7 minutes or so. Rudy had waited for Alina Lise for 15 minutes in total, so that meant there was a travel time of 7.5 minutes. It was a phenomenon corroborated by the teleportation incident back in Fatoa, since the people affected by that reported odd delays between when they disappeared and reappeared.
Right.
Another feat that stood out about this teleportation was the way the magic circle kept itself active all the time. It appeared ready to go no matter what the circumstances were, and that made Rudy wonder where it was getting its power from. There didn't seem to be any magic crystals nearby powering it, so the only thing he could think of was that it was absorbing mana from the air or getting powered from something underneath it. Either way, whatever feat of magic was allowing this circle to stay continuously active was invaluable information Rudy definitely wanted to know about. Now, this is the point where the anime starts to speed things up, since a journey which could have been one entire episode was instead condensed down to 7 minutes of seemingly standard adventure stuff. In reality, there was a lot more encounters with monsters, and even 2 extra chapters involving new characters and an ambush by bandits.
God, 2 whole chapters cut out. God
The whole
damn.
point was to bring up Rudy's mindset when it came to killing, and pretty much highlight how when fighting people, that was never really an option for him. It was kind of like its own consolidated side story similar to that of Rudy's adventures with Counter Arrow. I won't be going in depth into those chapters right now, but what you need to know is how Rudy's journey was broken up into 2 legs. The first was the 1-week trek from the ruins to the oasis town Bazaar, and the second was the 2-week expedition from Bazaar to Rapan. The anime combined both together to get through things faster, and in the process removed that second leg involving the new characters and bandits. There was quite a bit left out from the first leg too, and that's pretty much what I'll be focusing on now.
Okay.
So, the first night was spent staying in the ruins. Rudy wasn't sure how cold the desert got at night, and with the sun clearly getting close to setting, he figured it was best to wait it out and find out while they still had shelter. It was that same night that the incident with the succubus would happen, and this would be Rudy's wake-up call to be more careful. You see, with the last few years being spent in a safe and civilized university town, Rudy realized his senses were nowhere near what they used to be. He'd clearly gotten too comfortable living the way he had, and now his experience as an adventurer wasn't as refined as it used to be. So, getting more in tune was definitely proving to be a challenge, but more than anything it was the terrain and weather. Luckily, Alina Lise was handling all the directions, but even just keeping up was proving to be a challenge for him. He'd wanted to create a rainstorm and make things easier, but with every monster always looking for water, doing that would just result in them getting surrounded. Monsters here did have a weakness to cold though, so if they ever did find themselves in a situation like that, Rudy knew he could just freeze the air around them and capitalize on their susceptibility to that.
Fair enough.
Another solution for the heat that Rudy came up with instead was to create pockets of cold air and decrease the temperature around him.
Excuse me.
Just like how he created pockets of heat in Renoa, Rudy was just doing the opposite and cooling things down instead. It did only decrease the temperature by about 5 degrees Celsius though, so while it did make things a bit more manageable, it was still brutally hot to the point that fatigue was constantly creeping up on him.
Damn.
Only after freezing his canteen and putting it under his robe did Rudy find the journey became a bit more tolerable. Alina Lise, on the other hand, didn't seem fazed at the slightest, and Rudy believed that was probably because of her battle aura.
Badass bitch.
In any case, the first monster they would come across would be the Scorpion, and this was a creature comparable to the monsters in the Demon Continent. It was a not-so-pleasant surprise given how everyone always said the Demon Continent was more dangerous, but perhaps the area they were in was just especially dangerous. The next monster was significantly easier, and this was a simple spiky green cactus treant. A minor threat due to its ability to shoot needles and use earth magic, but aside from that, it wasn't very challenging. After that was a giant sandworm, and while yes it was big enough to swallow him and Alina Lise whole, they weren't very hard to deal with since Rudy could just turn the sand they were hiding in into a blender. That's right, through skillful manipulation of the sand around the worm, he was able to harden it into blades, then churn it around them and shred them to pieces.
That's so sick.
Quite a creative way of dealing with them if you ask me, and one I'm surprised he just doesn't use for every enemy they come across. The next monsters were by far the most dangerous, and these were a massive army of phalanx ants. It was a line of thousands spreading across the horizon, and they were well known to eat anything and everything they came across. By themselves they weren't very powerful at all, but as a group they were easily an S-rank threat. Their insatiable appetite meant they'd consume anything, and as a mutated version of the less threatening army ants, they were easily the most ferocious predator currently out here. So, whether they were dealing with stray dragons or humans, these ants could surround anything with their massive numbers, then eventually overcome them no matter how powerful.
Damn.
That's why Alina Lise knew it was best to just hide from them, and that's exactly what they did for over an hour. It was while they waited that Rudy would actually try to figure out a way to beat them, but no matter what he came up with, it just didn't seem effective enough. A massive nuke would likely cause crossfire, and something that didn't kill all of them at once would just result in them getting surrounded. So for now it seemed as if this was an enemy perhaps Rudy couldn't beat. It was once that was done that the two would come across yet another succubus, and this time its approach was slightly different. It had used giant bats to form a wall and separate Alina Lise, then took that opportunity to approach Rudy while he was isolated.
Alright.
Luckily, Rudy was able to set off a stone cannon before she got too close, but because of her resemblance to that of a human, he couldn't find it in him to use full power. At the last second, he dialed it back and, in the end, hit her with a non-lethal attack. Alina Lise would finish her off instead, and once again Rudy would have to detoxify himself from the succubus's poisons. Unlike how last time Alina Lise was able to restrain herself from Rudy's advances though, it seemed her willpower was starting to crumble a bit.
Oh no.
She was quite clearly getting flustered by what Rudy was doing, and that was indication that they needed to find a brothel soon.
Oh.
Shortly after, they would then be attacked by velociraptors, and this was a battle which brought the attention of Garudas. Giant chickens, I imagine, are similar to Philo, and also the natural predators to these raptors.
Whoa, that looks so
Alina
cool.
Lise would use the chaos to slip away from the fight, which was pretty good timing since she also sensed that something bigger was coming their way. So, all in all, this was every monster they came across on day one. It was a relentless onslaught that made the demon continent seem like a cakewalk. Sure, the monsters there were far more powerful, but while traveling with Ruijerd, they were never attacked this much. I mean, what Rudy did today felt like a week over there. The second day brought with it even more monsters, and there was actually an incident where Rudy got swallowed by a sandworm. He was caught off guard while fighting a scorpion, and this gave the worm the opportunity to get the jump on him. Luckily, he was able to cast magic from within the worm, and this allowed him to crawl out after killing it from the inside. Unfortunately, Rudy getting swallowed also broke Alina Lise's concentration, and this resulted in her getting poisoned by the scorpion. So it was a near-death experience for both of them, but one that was simply a matter of being unlucky, not unexperienced. Later that day was when they saw the behemoth too, and this was a peaceful giant that only attacked when attacked first. It was quite the anomaly in terms of presence and behavior, since despite their size, no one has ever found one of their corpses before. There was a group of adventurers that said they had managed to kill one, but that was only a rumor making it seem like it was possible. No one was actually sure whether that was true or not, but Alina Lise believed that if anyone could do it, then it was probably Rudy. Day 3 was when they encountered their first sandstorm, but what Rudy initially thought was just a regular weather phenomenon instead seemed more like a barrier due to its unnatural properties. The first was the way it acted like a stationary wall of sand, and the second was how after he'd cleared it via magic, it had returned less than an hour later exactly where it was before. It made him think that this was perhaps some sort of natural-looking defense that blocked the route to Orsted's ruins. It was from this point on that the monsters they encountered were far less dangerous and frequent, so days 4 and 5 dealt mainly with griffins. By now, Alina Lise couldn't control herself at all though, so when Rudy had held her as they ascended to the top of the cliff face, the very act of him touching her unleashed everything she was trying to hold back.
Oh my god.
The griffins would attack before anything would happen though, and the rest was a relatively incident-free journey all the way to Bazaar. There were a few more fights with some families of griffins, but that was because the area they were cutting through was a griffin nesting ground. This provided a pretty good source of food for them, since the younger the griffin, the more tender the meat. So much so that they had actually chosen to eat the child griffin over the mother or father. That brings us now to Alina Lise's story about her past, but I think that's something I'll try to include next episode.
Okay.
So that's pretty much everything you missed from this episode, not including the extra 2 chapters involving the bandit ambush. I hope you enjoyed hearing more about Mushoku Tensei, and if you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing.
I love it.
Don't forget to check out the new Mugen shirts too, but for now, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do.
So
until next time.
Ciao. Sick, cool, really interesting to see the stuff that was left out. It's mad. It's absolutely mad, but I feel like, yeah, they want to get to the next part, and that next episode is so cool. And then, yeah, we'll check out Annie's video. But until then, become a member. Click that join button. Once you join for like 99p, I think it is, you get to watch my videos early. And then when I do live streams, you get a badge and an emote. Only you get as a member. And thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video, I want to be able to watch patron-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series. Links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all I ask. That's greatly appreciated for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? You guys think of this? Click like, subscribe, already. Leave comments down below. Tell me what I should watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys. Alright, guys. Nick, damn.